Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching.
North America is sometimes called Anglo-America due to the dominance of English language and culture. But in the sub-region of Canada, two cities, Montreal and Vancouver, are distinctive for their non-English societies. In Vancouver, on Canada's Pacific coast, Asian immigration stirs a cultural conflict that highlights the relationship between global connections and local voices. The year is 1994, and David Ho is one of the top real estate agents in Vancouver, British Columbia, because he knows what his clients are looking for. David's family contracting business designed and built this house specifically for Asian buyers, like the Hong Kong Chinese family who will be viewing it today.
Developers would put
Inside this $1.3 million home are many luxury features which David says are demanded by his wealthy clients.
The feature of this living room is, first of all, is its size. It's a very large living room. Then it's the high ceiling. It makes the room very spacious.
Space is extremely limited in the crowded city of Hong Kong, but in Canada, families like this one can buy their dream home. Building these houses, however, requires a controversial action. Hundreds of houses are being torn down to make room for new homes like these, which are more modern and much larger than their predecessors. The cultural landscape of Vancouver is being transformed by the influences of Asia. In Hong Kong, people are scared. It's the mid-90s, and China is about to reassert control over the British protectorate. Wealthy families are looking for a safe haven. One factor is distance. Since aircraft fly in Great Circle routes, the closest major city in North America is actually Vancouver. Canada made it very attractive to come. Pacific Rim immigration is not new for Vancouver. It has an old and well-established Chinatown. But in the run-up to '97, there were many upscale migrants, and they are not moving to Chinatown. Geographer David Lay has been studying the city's changing landscape. As he observes, Vancouver is essentially split into two sections.
Below us here, we can see the east side of Vancouver. The city is divided into two halves, west and east. The east side has always been the home of non-English speaking immigrants, some from Europe, some from Asia, but working class people. And the landscape we see below us is a landscape of small houses, and the houses are very visible.
Most of the immigrant communities are located in this more densely populated east side of the city. Over on the west side, there is greater wealth, which means more space and more trees.
We're looking west now into the west side of Vancouver, and a set of neighborhoods that are almost concealed beneath the urban forest.
It is here in this greener, more affluent part of the city where the new Asian elites have chosen to live. Many of David Ho's friends are children of Hong Kong businessmen. Their parents continue to earn great wealth in the Asian manufacturing industry. They often commute between Vancouver and Hong Kong. They believe the best way to preserve their wealth is to invest in real estate. And the best way for their investments to appreciate is to replace older Anglo-Canadian houses like these with newer, larger Asian-style houses like these. And this is where the problems begin. As developers rush to accommodate these new arrivals, they are tearing down existing homes. Many West Side residents have become concerned by the changes they see happening around them. Lissa Forshaw has lived in this neighborhood her whole life.
I knew this house well because I used to play across the street from it, and it had beautiful timbers inside and oak floors. And what we got in its place is this monstrosity, which certainly doesn't fit into the neighborhood at all. They are incredibly ugly and they shouldn't be here. They're pink, they're fluffy, they're big, they're unfriendly. And it really annoys me that people come in here and don't want to blend into the neighborhood.
Like Lissa Forshaw, John Banfield is worried about his neighborhood. Gardens and trees like these are often removed in order to build the largest house possible.
They either didn't want an older house or didn't want to fix it up, or money was no object. So all of a sudden we were caught off guard with houses coming down and new houses going up, and the new houses unfortunately were not fitting in with the existing architecture.
A couple of years ago, this was just like a new suburb. There was just simply such an incredible density of demolition and construction.
To a geographer, older houses like this one, being replaced by newer ones like these, reflect more than just a local casual trend. They are the result of global forces from far beyond this region.
Here we are now in South Shaughnessy, in a street where I would guess more than half the houses have been rebuilt within the last 5 years. And it's a striking example of the meeting of the local and the global. To understand the landscape changes on this block, you need to understand the remarkable transition in Canadian and especially Western Canadian society.
While many Asians are moving to Vancouver, others are simply investing here. During the 1980s, the economic strength of the Pacific Rim had been the driving force behind the economy of British Columbia. In 1991, for the first time, more British Columbian exports were sent across the Pacific Ocean than across the border to the United States. Many Asian companies own major businesses throughout the city, like this retail shopping mall. And each year, thousands of tourists arrive from Japan, helping make tourism the second largest sector of British Columbia's economy. All of these elements have created an increased Asian presence in Vancouver. The Ho family business is thriving thanks to this booming Asian market. Using today's global communication systems, David closes many of his deals by fax and phone, with clients still in Hong Kong and Taiwan.
Hello. Hi, Anthony.你同老豆講得得。
David and his father frequently inspect their custom-built homes. They take great pride in the large open spaces offered by their designs. But the Hos are worried about the strict new rules now in place over house size and style. They are not sure their business can withstand the conflict of cultures.
Here, the diaspora from Europe is meeting a new diaspora. We are, in a sense, in a borderland, a meeting place between great international influences, the age of the Atlantic and the age of the Pacific, Europe and Asia. They're meeting on this block, they're meeting in this city, and they're meeting more broadly in this region.
The new design guidelines may make David's job harder. This English Tudor exterior did not appeal to today's clients.
Okay. Thanks for coming. Yeah, okay.
It is 7 years later, and some of the conflicts have been resolved at both the local and the global scales. Locally, Vancouver enacted a design compromise.
In this area, there was a menu of about a half dozen styles that builders were given to work with. But by far the most popular has been, in fact, this one that I rather jokingly call Neo-Tudor, because it is a revival of what was the Tudor revival of the 1900-1920 period.
As long as developers built in details like traditional chimneys, steep pitched roofs, and wooden facade work, the houses could be slightly larger than others.
I should say that this compromise has been amazingly successful, and it shows that perhaps there is a future for multiculturalism after all.
But the push to build new homes has been slowed by a housing market dragged 30% lower by forces at several geographic scales. At the global scale, Vancouver actually experienced a return migration to Hong Kong, following its reunification with China in 1997.
First of all, people realized that the political situation was not as serious as they anticipated. And secondly, not many of them have been able to make significant money here and have gone back and renewed old businesses or opened new businesses in Hong Kong.
It's incredible.
David Ho's construction company now looks back on its past achievements. Ho left the sagging residential real estate market to start an internet company. Links with Asia, while strong, are changing throughout the city and the region.
Part of the story, of course, is the provincial economy, which is very much dependent on Asia-Pacific. And this has not been a good time in the Asia-Pacific economy, especially in Japan, where a lot of the raw materials from British Columbia are exported.
And even though the U.S. economy slumped, its low interest rates have helped vault the U.S. back to its traditional role as BC's largest trading partner.
The major issue here is the lumber industry and U.S. house building, so that the BC lumber industry follows very closely the cycles of American home building.
In Vancouver itself, there is less new construction, and the older houses are bought by a new Asian demographic.
In the last couple of years, with the decline of the business immigrants and the wealthier immigrants, we've had continuing very significant movement from Asia. And that movement is perhaps reflected more by these properties we see. We're in Vancouver's east side now, much more modest area. And people living here would be coming from India, from the People's Republic of China, perhaps from the Philippines.
Without great wealth and power, these new Asian Americans are not likely to encounter the same kinds of cultural conflicts. They just want to adapt and make new lives for themselves in a city of diverse local voices and ever-changing global connections. Within North America, the subregion of Canada is the second largest country in the world. But with its harsh northern climate, much of this land is sparsely inhabited. The streetlights in this nighttime image from space show the distribution of population in the eastern U.S. and Canada. 85% of Canadians live within 200 miles of the U.S. border. One of its biggest cities is Montreal. As in Vancouver, immigration has a major impact on Montreal's urban and political geography. Montreal is the primate city of Quebec, a French island in an Anglo-American sea. The Quebecois work very hard to preserve their language and maintain their cultural identity. But growing nationalism and the Quebec sovereignty movement could lead to the breakup of the Canadian Federation. The future of French language and culture in this Canadian province, in fact in all of North America, may depend on children like these.
Quelqu'un a pas de règles, on le prête notre règle.
Oui.
The children in this Montreal school come from a variety of ethnic backgrounds, and at home they speak many different languages. But every day, here in class, they read, write, and learn in French. Why are these children so critical to the future of French Quebec? The answer is demographics. Like most of North America, Quebec's birth rate began to decline in the 1970s. But Quebec's French-speaking majority, known as the Québécois, suffers from the lowest birth rate in all of Canada. The situation is so serious that the provincial government pays families 6,000 Canadian dollars for every child born after the first two. But still, the birth rate is low. So Quebec has had to look outside its borders and welcome immigrants from around the world. The problem is these immigrants threaten French culture. They are arriving and multiplying at such a rapid rate that the francophone population may soon become a minority in the city of Montreal. And many new immigrants do not want to learn French.
Play with it. But Sammy said, no, you cannot play in this sandbox because I am the king of the...
When he goes away, he goes on the side.
Okay, when he goes away, you can use the...
Victor Plopanu is learning English. He and his brother Tudor have come with their parents from Eastern Europe to escape an unstable economy and political climate.
In that hole. Okay, next.
From Romania, the Plopanus headed west to search for a better life in Canada. They settled in French-speaking Quebec and the city of Montreal, home to the largest English-speaking community in the province. Montreal is divided into two relatively distinct areas, the English on one side, the French on the other. The Plopanus have chosen to settle on the city's English side, for they believe that English is the key to success for their children. But for immigrants in Quebec, choosing English has a price. Dan Plopanu is paying to send his sons to this private English nursery school. Although English public schools exist in the area, the only free education available by law to immigrants is a French one.
Feel like dancing? Sorry, I only dance with the boss. Too bad.
In spite of these laws, English is still readily accessible to Victor and Tudor. Each day they eagerly watch the English language television transmitted to Quebec from nearby cities. For the Plopanus, learning English is a natural choice, for they see this place where they have come to live as more than just Quebec.
Here is North America, so it's English first. So Quebec is an island of French between a sea, in a sea of English.
This sea of English is a source of concern for the Québécois. Although small pockets of French speakers exist throughout Canada, the largest population resides in Quebec. Yet all of them are surrounded, not only by English Canada, but by the largest and most influential English-speaking country in this region, the United States. Pierre-Étienne Laporte is the director of a government-run research organization called the French Language Council.
One has to keep in mind that Quebec is in a very special situation as a result of its proximity to the American giant. From a geolinguistic perspective, English has an influential presence here because we are deeply integrated into American civilization, which is the civilization that surrounds us.
Nearly half of Quebec's 7 million people live in the city of Montreal, and it is here that the battle between French and English is most heated. The Québécois recognize that protecting language is the most effective means of preserving culture. To help get protection from English, the Quebec government turns to the federal government. Historically, it was Montreal's English-speaking minority who held the economic power in the province. Although this community was only 1/4 of the population of Montreal, the language used in business and commerce and on many public signs was English. But signs like this one are now a relic of the past, since the French majority enacted laws to protect their language. One of their first actions was to stop written English on the streets. Don Cartwright is a cultural geographer who studies language use in Quebec.
As a geographer, signs of the landscape, the streetscape, are vital. It sends a message about the fabric of the society in which I find myself. And this is why it was important for the Québécois to take back the streetscape. And consequently, in the 70s, they passed legislation which made unilingual English signs forbidden. And in their place, they established the sign law, which meant that only French language signs could appear on the streetscape.
Because of these laws, many English-speaking companies, like this one, Sun Life, began to leave in droves. Overall, nearly 20% of the English population left Quebec in the early 70s and 80s. Today, this law has been relaxed, and bilingual signs are permitted, but the French language now dominates this landscape. Even old landmarks like the Queen Elizabeth Hotel and Windsor Station now show their compliance with these laws. The Québécois have succeeded in their battle with the English-speaking minority. But it is Quebec's rapidly growing immigrant population that currently presents an even greater challenge to the Québécois. In this immigration office, a poster announces that French is the key to success in Quebec. And to ensure that these newcomers agree, the government pays them. Immigrant families can receive up to 200 Canadian dollars per week to be taught by the government how to assimilate into French-speaking society. Monique Daigle works with Quebec's Ministry of Immigration.
We have certainly come to understand the importance of integrating this immigrant population into our majority Francophone society if we want to ensure the continuation of the French reality.
I don't like the idea of having to send my children to a French public school and not being able to send them to an English public school.
Dan and Dowena Plopanu don't feel obligated to help preserve French language and culture. Although money is tight, they will try to send Victor to a private English kindergarten next year.
We will do an effort. I don't know how, but I'm determined to do this effort because I think it's the better thing for him to go in an English school.
Turkey is traditionally the favorite item on the Thanksgiving menu.
Good, the favorite item on the Thanksgiving.
In spite of the laws, the attraction of English remains, both for the Plopanus and for all of Quebec's immigrants. As Don Cartwright explains, this attraction will always be a reality for the Québécois.
They are always going to be in contact with the English language. It's always going to be penetrating into Quebec through television, through radio, through magazines, and as a result, they simply cannot give up the vigilance that they take for the protection of the language and the culture.
In 1995, French identity politics came to a head with the province-wide referendum on Quebec's sovereignty. Would Quebec break away and form its own country? The vote was very close. By a margin of 1%, the residents chose to remain Canadian. The spatial pattern of the votes reveals much about social and economic divisions within Quebec. In northern areas of the province, Native Americans voted no to sovereignty. So did Quebecers living near the Canadian capital in Ottawa and along the U.S. border. But yes votes predominated in most of the other ridings or counties in Quebec, the heartland of French Canada. Most divided was Montreal itself. Here, the darker the color, the higher is the percentage of English speakers. So it was no real surprise that these West Side districts voted no on the sovereignty question. Here, the darkest colors represent the highest percentages of French speakers. As predicted, these Northeast districts voted yes for sovereignty. But how would the remaining areas vote? Here are the areas of the city where people live whose mother tongues are neither French nor English. The darkest colors show the highest percentages. Even though many French speakers live here too, the allophones held the deciding votes. They did not want to leave Canada. They tipped the referendum against a sovereign Quebec, and these areas voted no. It appears for now it's the immigrants who hold the key to Quebec's future. The leader of the sovereignty movement, Jacques Parizeau, blamed the defeat on the ethnic vote and on Anglo money. Even though this was partially true, his statement caused an uproar in Canada because it confirmed an us and them attitude. Parizeau resigned, and the sovereignty movement has pulled back for now to regroup. Immigration may be helping to offset Quebec's declining birth rate, but it is not clear what it does to preserve the French language and culture. In the meantime, the U.S. CIA warns that Canada's paramount political problem continues to be the relationship of the province of Quebec, with its French-speaking residents and unique culture, to the remainder of the country.
Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching. For information about this and other Annenberg CPB programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.